Oh my gosh, the van's on fire.
A terrifying scene at a gas station.
This is extremely dangerous.
Everything on the counter kind of jumped. It was a large explosion.
Sends people scrambling for their lives.
Everybody please evacuate.
This is a recipe for disaster.
Their shoes are on fire.
Oh my Lord.
And later, in the midst of a robbery, a man bravely fights back.
All three of the guys are struggling to get out of here.
Crazy video shows the moments and robbers were stopped in their tracks.
It was me or them.
Wednesday, June 2nd, 2021, Sequim, Washington. It's 2 a.m. when Kiana Troxler starts her graveyard shift at a local gas station.
Right when I got to work, I had told myself, today's gonna be a good day. One of my other supervisors, he laughed and slapped his knee. He's like, haha, yeah, right. I'm like, nah, you wait and see. It's gonna be a good day.
Kiana is one of 5 employees working that day.
Not too busy, not too slow, just regular day of business.
But just after 9 a.m., all of that changes. A white van pulls up, and after attaching the pump to his car, the driver heads inside.
He locks his doors, but the flowing gas pump is still there, unattended, pumping gas.
This is risky because we've all seen the signs at the gas station. Don't leave the pump unattended.
And this man is about to find out why.
We see a stranger creep up and start exhibiting some odd behavior.
He looks suspicious right from the first moment.
We see him standing between the 2 pillars, and to most people, it might look like this guy is just zoning out, but what he's really looking for is an opportunity.
The man heads straight for the unattended pump.
He just starts to, act like he's filling up his van. That's not his vehicle.
When the driver returns, he doesn't notice the man at first. But when he hits the unlock button, the stranger makes a bold move.
The guy is trying to get into the van.
Realizing that this man is trying to steal his car, the driver confronts him.
I can only imagine the conversation if you walk back out to your car and there's a stranger pumping your gas.
The stranger tried to tell the customer that he worked there and he wanted to help them. And when the man said no, I believe that's when he really started to get angry. And so the customer came inside to seek help.
Hearing some commotion, other customers step in, including one man who happens to be licensed to carry a gun.
This customer is legally armed, and he decides to pull out his weapon, maybe just to intimidate him.
But even though a man has now approached him with a gun in his hand, the stranger still refuses to back away from the car.
The man with the gas is fearless. He's completely unfazed.
And he's angry. He picks up the gas nozzle and points it right at the man holding the gun.
This person starts to spray the gas. So then he realizes, listen, if a gun isn't gonna stop this guy, I need to get out of here because I'm gonna get set on fire.
He even tries to chase him with the gas nozzle, but it's too short.
That's when the situation gets out of control.
911, where is your emergency? What's going on? Somebody is pouring gas over people's vehicles and saying he's going to set them on fire.
This is incredibly dangerous. The crazed man is dousing everything with gasoline.
He's spraying gas all over the place, slipping around.
Startled staff inside the store watch it all unfold on live security footage. If the pumps catch fire, this could turn into a deadly inferno within seconds.
What is this guy thinking? What if that van blows up?
The frightened manager goes outside to try and reason with the man, who is now brandishing a lighter.
He was saying, don't do this, you don't want to do this, put it down.
Things are starting to get wild. The gas is spilling everywhere. This is extremely dangerous. We're dealing with explosive materials here. And this guy's so frantic and violent, he doesn't even care.
The man is in such a reckless rage. He seems to want everything and everyone to go up in flames.
Witnesses say the man starts making threats to blow up the gas station.
Pouring gasoline over himself and threatening to do it to my manager also.
He's willing to set himself on fire and burn the whole place down and anybody else who's around.
Terrified for her manager's life, Kiana hits the emergency shutoff valve inside the store.
Okay, we shut the pump shut off. Oh my Lord.
This is a recipe for disaster. The concrete, the van, the pump, and even people around are covered in gasoline.
And then the man sparks a lighter.
And within a second, we see a flame.
Oh my God, they set it on fire.
They set it on fire?
They set it on fire.
Okay.
They set it on fire.
This is absolutely horrifying.
He drops the nozzle, ignites the lighter, and then within seconds, the whole place goes up in flames. The fire explodes.
Even inside the store, people feel the impact.
I felt the sliding doors shake. Everything on the counter kind of jumped. It was a large explosion.
Panicked, Kiana races to the intercom.
Everybody please evacuate all vehicles from the gas pumps now. There is a fire.
The pumps are down. We shut them down.
He was just trying to destroy basically everything and anything. He set himself and my manager on fire.
In the midst of the chaos, Kiana's boss manages to fight through the blaze to grab an extinguisher.
It's like a dark figure and very bright, fiery image. He immediately grabbed the fire extinguisher and started extinguishing the flames from the bottom like you're supposed to do.
He even turns the extinguisher on the man who just tried to kill him.
You can see my manager pushing the stranger out of the fire over while both of their shoes are on fire.
He saved this arsonist's life. He sprayed this guy with an extinguisher at short range.
But the danger is far from over.
So what if the flames leaked to the underground tanks? There could have been a massive explosion that could have killed people from miles away.
In the video, you can see those two metal circles right in the right part of the frame. That is the fuel tank itself. If the fuel would have wandered down into those holes, it could have been way worse, and I might not be alive today.
Despite the imminent danger, the undeterred arsonist remains determined to get away.
You can see the stranger jump right back into the deepest part of the fire, attempting to steal the white van, but it is locked. He decides to try the white pickup next and is successful.
They stole the gentleman's truck and took off, so we did not see who it was.
Okay, ma'am. And did we see which direction the truck left?
We were in shock.
Instead of thanking this gas manager for saving his life, he steals a truck and then speeds away.
The man peels off onto the roadway, driving recklessly for 11 miles before coming to a dramatic halt.
He crashes the truck into a Washington State trooper. The officer was in his car just pulling over a semi-truck when he gets hit. The injuries were so severe that both were airlifted to the hospital.
Back at the station, Kiana's boss is miraculously alive with only minor injuries.
My manager was very fortunate. The only damage he had to himself was the hair on his arms were a little singed and the soles of his shoes were slightly melted.
Police identify the arsonist as 40-year-old David Johnson, a repeat offender who'd only been out of jail for 2 weeks. He faces multiple charges, including first-degree arson, first-degree attempted robbery, and second-degree assault, as well as theft of a motor vehicle and 2 counts of malicious mischief.
A lot of people say that it might have been, fair for him to be charged with attempted murder. I believe he did try to kill quite a few people that day.
People wonder if Johnson had a death wish.
When you have a weapon pointed at you and it doesn't bother you, like pointed at your head, that really, speaks to me that you do want to die. And that day, I don't think he really cared who he took with him. I do hope that the man gets the help he does need. Hopefully he can turn his life around and understand what he did was very wrong and quite selfish.
6 days after the incident, the Sheriff's Department releases the video to the public, and it instantly goes viral.
Some new video showing what a man was up to in Sequim before hitting and injuring a Washington State officer.
It was all over social media.
After seeing that video online, Kiana's family is relieved that she and her co-workers are not hurt.
My fiance was like really happy that I was home safe, and we're both really good friends with my manager, so we were really happy that he was at home safe with his family.
In spite of the terrifying ordeal, Kiana still decided to return to work.
I was pretty freaked out the day of. I was not afraid to go back to work because chances of this happening again in my lifetime fairly slim. I'm not going to let it take control of my life.
Kiana's manager has shied away from the media spotlight, but people consider him a hero.
My manager basically saved everyone's life that day. A lot of people come into the store and they'll be like, good job. And he's like, thanks, I did what I had to do. And I'm like, you're a hero, dude. Like, you're come on now. You're a superhero. Like, you're amazing. You know you are. Accept it.
As for Kiana, she copes with a sense of dark humor.
People would ask, like, how's your day? Or how's it going? I'd be like, well, I almost died at work and my manager saved my life. But other than that, everything's good. Business as usual.
In another Washington city, another employee also faces terrifying danger on the job. February 15th, 2020, Everett, Washington, 10:50 p.m. Chris Vincent is a longtime bud tender at a local dispensary.
Being a bud tender is pretty much the same as being a bartender. The difference is I serve people marijuana. People come in for multiple reasons, either recreational or medical. I have to try to help them find what they want.
It's late, and Chris is just about to close up the shop.
It was a normal day, and I was starting to wind down the store. We close at midnight. So the hour before, I like, get, the floors clean, get the glass clean, make sure stuff's stocked up.
And because of 2 recent robberies at the store, security is top priority.
A couple months prior, a couple guys broke into our shop at 4 o'clock in the morning with a sledgehammer. Just cleaned us out. They took probably close to $15,000 to $20,000 worth of product. And then a couple days before Valentine's Day, they came in about 11 o'clock in the morning and held up the morning bud tender. But our shop wasn't the only one being hit at the time.
Multiple dispensaries in the area are also targeted.
Because marijuana isn't legalized across the country, dispensaries can't drop their money off at most banks. Banks are federally regulated, so they unfortunately have a lot of cash on hand. This can make them a huge target for robbers.
We have close to $1 million worth of inventory.
So the robbers, all they have to do is clear the shelves. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that there's someone casing the joint and figuring out what to take from the store to make the most money. Dispensaries being what they are and having as much cash and product on hand, it's also common for them to have quite a few cameras around to capture whatever might happen.
So Chris keeps a close eye on the security monitors.
We have so many cameras around the place, it's unreal. Almost like a casino.
Suddenly, his worst fear becomes reality. He sees 3 men outside the store who are heading straight for him.
I looked into the camera a little bit and kind of was like, what are these guys doing? And then all of a sudden, the guys just took off in a dead run, and I kind of froze for a second, for like 3 or 4 seconds, and then the door barreling open, and they had the gun up.
The robbers burst into the dispensary, and almost immediately, one of them points a gun at Chris.
They were concentrating on telling me to open the register, open the register, open the register.
They know exactly what they're here for. Having a gun pointed in your face is one of the scariest things that can happen to you. A lot of times our adrenaline kicks in, but we freeze up and don't really know what to do. He maintains his composure while they run around.
Chris is also prepared. He has a wireless alarm button given to him by the store owner for exactly this kind of emergency.
What really caught them off guard is I had an alarm lanyard around my neck, and they see me push it. They said, "He pushed the alarm, let's get out of here."
The thieves think the police are coming, but to Chris's horror, it seems the alarm has malfunctioned.
Nothing happened. So they stopped and came back.
And these robbers waste no time. One orders Chris to empty the register, while another stuffs all the products he can grab into a bag.
He took his glasses off and set them down on my chair that was next to my register and left them there. And he grabbed his bag, opened it up, and tries to start shoving stuff into the bag.
But that's when Chris sees an opportunity.
The guy that was getting on the wall, he had the gun in his hand, but he couldn't hold the bag and the gun and pull stuff off the wall. So he put the gun in his waistband. I was waiting for my time to get in there. When he put the gun away, that's when I took action. It was me or them.
As Chris tries to figure out how to stop the robbers, he remembers something.
I have bear spray located all over the store.
Marijuana dispensaries are prohibited from having guns on the premises. So what do? They have baseball bats or bear mace.
Bear spray is non-lethal, but if it takes a bear down, it's going to take a grown man down.
So Chris makes a bold, calculated move.
If you do a play-by-play on the video, you'll see me standing at the register, and it's a Verdi desk, so it raises up and down. So underneath of it, I have bear spray. I look over at the other guy, and you see me just grab it and just very calmly just open it like I was opening up a bottle of Coca-Cola.
He stays calm, cool, and collected.
And I just started going to town on the guy.
He goes after one on the right side, and before the guy on the left even knows what's happening, he's already turned his sights on him. These guys are completely engulfed in this thick cloud of bear mace.
I kept my finger on the trigger and did a fanning motion. I just sprayed the guy coming on my left, and I came to the guy on the right, and then the other guy was trying to get out the door.
Now, all three robbers just want to get out of the store and away from Chris.
Bear spray can cause significant swelling of the nasal passages. It can cause trouble breathing, which can bring on panic. It can cause your eyes to shut uncontrollably. People are fumbling around, they can't see.
The key ingredient of bear mace is something found in chili peppers. It causes involuntary eye closure and then respiratory issues to stop aggressive behavior.
And it burns horrible.
But it works.
All three of the guys are struggling to get out of here at this point. We see them frantically knock things over while they're trying to get out. None of them want anything to do with it.
If you ever watched Looney Tunes or cartoons, it was just like what you see in a cartoon. They scattered like no other's business. They couldn't even get the door open fast enough. I mean, they were knocking stuff down. They were hysterical because I got the guy right square in the face.
Finally, they get the door open, making a desperate run for it with thousands of dollars worth of merchandise. Chris immediately calls the police. When they arrive, they find important clues. In their rush to escape, the suspects leave key evidence, including sunglasses and a cell phone. And everything is caught on camera.
One of the good things about this having occurred at a marijuana dispensary was that there was video. That video was posted on social media.
Posting the video leads to a flood of tips. But to Chris's surprise, it also turns him into somewhat of a local celebrity.
Crazy video shows the moments and robbers were stopped in their tracks. A store employee used bear spray to chase them out of an Everett pot shop.
I was very surprised. My favorite newscaster said my full name, and I was just like, that was the best part of the whole ordeal.
Still, Chris is modest about what he did.
It was lots of praise, and you're a hero, you know, I'm glad you did that. And, you know, it's not a hero thing to do, it's just, I was protecting myself and protecting white as ours.
A few months after the robbery, authorities arrest the three men seen in the video, who were all in their early 20s, and charge them with first-degree robbery.
For them to target us like that, it's just like, you know, shame on you. They got away with it, you know, twice, and then the third time, it just didn't work out for them.
Police say the suspects are likely connected to the string of robberies at other local dispensaries. The arrests bring Chris some much-needed stress relief. But going back to work has still been hard.
You know, to be honest with you, I didn't want to come back. I really didn't. But the thing is the owner of the shop and I were pretty close friends. We've been friends for over 8 years.
And Chris knows that his quick-thinking bear mace tactic prevented things from being a lot worse.
Fighting back against a robbery doesn't always have to end up with somebody getting hurt. In this case, Chris, thinking to use bear spray, nobody got hurt, less product was stolen, less cash was stolen, and the outcome was pretty good.
We know they'll never be back at this store. It would be a pretty bold move.
I'm glad that they got caught. You know, I'm sorry that they screwed up the rest of their life. You know, I mean, we do dumb things when we're younger, but, you know, some are dumber than others.
A dangerous traffic stop.
Was he gonna attack me?
This is not your average traffic stop.
He has no idea if there's weapons.
Takes a scary turn when a protective mom gets involved.
Sometimes the mother's love is unconditional and unlawful.
This really escalates the situation.
And later.
Captured on surveillance video outside their house.
My husband comes running, yelling, "Come here, come here."
A couple's quiet night at home turns into terror.
What were his intentions? Who else was with him?
I don't even want to leave my house.
Traffic stop turns terrifying for an Idaho officer.
November 21st, 2016. Lewiston, Idaho. Police are on the hunt for 20-year-old Jesse Harrell.
He has a rap sheet a mile long.
He had multiple warrants for his arrest, 2 for driving without privileges, and then a felony warrant for malicious injury to property, and for a felony aggravated assault where he had actually used a pistol and had assaulted a citizen.
Really just a loose cannon. And so it's very important that this person be apprehended because he was a danger to public safety.
With his criminal patterns, if officers don't catch him, he will escalate.
Police know Jesse is probably armed, but they aren't sure where he is.
The police had a hunch that Jesse might be staying at his mother's house.
Some of the police are assigned to monitor his mom's house, while Officer Woods patrols the streets nearby.
So they actually put a lookout outside the house to keep surveillance on it to figure out whether or not he was staying there.
When the officers are casing this house, they want to see who's coming and going, is there heavy traffic, and most importantly, is Jesse there?
At one point, something catches their attention.
They see a green car pull out of the driveway of this house, and their first instinct is to wonder, is Jesse inside?
So they send Officer Woods to go check it out.
Officer Woods knows the car. It belongs to Jesse's mother, Angelia.
I pulled the car over a week before for the no registration, and I knew that his mother was driving the vehicle.
So now he tries to quickly and strategically force Angelia to stop.
I tried to get into a position where I'd be able to catch up to the vehicle and make a traffic stop. And I immediately turned my emergency lights on.
But that's when things start to get weird. Angelia ignores the lights and keeps driving.
In my experience, people that do this don't want you to see whatever they're concealing.
What is Angelia hiding?
Finally, after driving for several blocks, Angelia pulls over, and with his dash cam rolling, Officer Woods approaches the car.
When I confronted her about having no registration, she stated that she was headed to her dad's house to get money so that she could register the car the next day.
But then there's a strange noise.
A thump in the back of the car.
He hears what seems to be a sound coming from the trunk and realizes this is not going to be your average traffic stop.
The minute he hears that noise, he knows somebody's in the trunk.
I looked at Angelia and I said, "Is Jesse in the car?"
As soon as he asks, Angelia knows the gig is up. She lets the officer know that he's indeed in the trunk.
But that's not all. She says Jesse is armed.
She said, "It's a toy gun, don't shoot him." I became obviously very concerned. I get on my radio.
446, I need you here immediately.
Is she telling the truth, or is she just trying to scare him off?
I didn't believe her.
Angelia has already been deceptive to police just by keeping Jesse in the trunk. So when she says it's a toy gun, why should we believe her?
It's kind of weird that this grown man would be in the trunk of a car with a toy gun. Very, very suspicious. Now, this really escalates the situation.
Toy gun or real gun, the officer has no idea, but a gun is a gun.
And now this officer has a really tough decision to make.
But Officer Woods knows he has one advantage.
If he's in the trunk, if he had an actual gun, he's gonna have a lot harder time finding me to shoot me if he can't see me.
And Woods is also hoping Jesse thinks about how risky it would be to try and fire a gun.
It's pretty common knowledge that if you have a gun and lift it towards an officer, there's a chance they could use deadly force. This kind of gave him the chance to approach the situation without having to think of deadly force first.
And that's when Jesse makes an unexpected move.
Heard the latch go.
Trunk just sort of pops open. His heart begins to race.
To Officer Woods' surprise, Jesse suddenly pops out of the trunk after activating an inside latch.
The special latch to help you get out in case something bad happens, like you get kidnapped. But in this situation, our guy uses it to pop out of the trunk.
Now, he is in a battle to restrain Jesse because he does have a gun.
He sees Jesse with the gun in hand and he realizes he's got to act quick just in case it might be real.
Was he going to attack me, or was he going to try to run away?
It's a dangerous struggle.
When I reach over and grab the edge of the trunk trying to hold the lid down, it's wet. So when I lean on it, I actually slip off the back of the trunk and kind of go across the back of the vehicle. I catch my balance, and by this time, he's opening up the trunk, and I grabbed it and I tried to shut him back into it to hold him in the trunk.
Jesse won't stay put, but Officer Woods realizes the gun is indeed a toy.
The gun he had hits the top of the trunk, and when it did that, I heard the sound of it, and it was plastic. I was confident enough that it was a toy gun.
So this officer makes a bold move. He leans into Jesse, he kind of wraps him up with his arms, sort of tackling him, and then he takes him to the pavement.
He has no idea if there's other weapons, or what if Jesse's mom tries to defend her son any way she can.
Jesse's mom begs Officer Woods not to arrest him.
And, to not hurt him. She was concerned that he was going to get hurt. She was pretty excited.
Angelia was probably just trying to protect her son, but concealing a felon with active warrants, never a good idea. Sometimes a mother's love is unconditional and unlawful.
Thankfully, backup arrives quickly. They're able to fully detain Jesse, and they arrest the mom. And this situation is under control.
The second officer shows up. We roll Jesse onto his stomach, handcuff him, basically pick him up and take him to the front of my patrol car.
In addition to the toy gun, police find a knife on Jesse, and both he and his mom are charged.
We charged him with obstructing an officer, battery assault on an officer, and a concealed dangerous weapon. And Angelia was charged with accessory to a crime, possession of a controlled substance, and paraphernalia.
The dashcam video of the wild traffic stop earns Officer Woods widespread praise.
Once the police chief viewed the video of this incident, he was extremely proud of Officer Woods. He believed that he acted in an exemplary manner in an incredibly tough, incredibly volatile situation, and everyone went home alive.
My chief at the time had seen the video, and he was very upbeat on how we handled the traffic stop, and he released it to the public.
Traffic stop turns terrifying for an Idaho officer when a suspect pops out of the trunk with a gun.
And soon, the video goes viral.
One reason people have found this video fascinating is just the fact that this is a mother and a son. Highly unusual to have a fugitive son that you're harboring in the trunk of your car. And furthermore, once Jesse is outed, once they realize he's in the trunk of the car, he doesn't just lay down and accept it, he fights back. And thankfully, we had this officer to get this dangerous person detained, under control, and behind bars.
I'm very glad it turned out the way it did.
Woods is overwhelmed by the response.
A lot of the people in the community I've known most of my life saying good job or congratulations, and it's nice.
But he insists he was just doing what he is supposed to do.
A nice happy ending for our officer in this scary situation.
For me, it's just doing my job and making sure that I keep vigilant and keep myself safe and the community safe.
In Alabama, another startling crime also has police searching in the night. December 31st, 2015, 11 p.m., near Birmingham, Alabama. Danielle Yancey and her husband are celebrating New Year's Eve at home.
Usually we stay in on New Year's Eve just because of our dogs. We go to like an early dinner, come home, and just chill out. So I was in the back in our bedroom watching a movie, and my husband was in another room watching football on TV.
But before the clock strikes midnight, their quiet evening takes a terrifying turn.
Close to 11 o'clock, my husband comes running down the hallway yelling, and he was like, "Come here, come here." And I paused the movie, got up, and I was like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "There's a naked guy in our breezeway." Had no idea what was happening and didn't believe him. And he said, "Check the security camera."
Danielle sees a mystery man on their doorbell camera. And to her horror, he is nude, wearing nothing but a sock and a Ronald Reagan mask.
First of all, who does that? Who runs around naked with a Ronald Reagan mask? You have someone crawling around the outside of your house at night, naked. That's frightening.
It was someone that was naked. He had a mask on, a presidential mask, and he was kind of covered on his private part with a sock, and kind of kneeling down and looking in the windows. It just immediately gave me chills because it was very creepy.
I'm not really sure what's more disturbing here, a naked man running up to a house or the naked man is wearing a Ronald Reagan mask.
Still, even if they're tempted to laugh, Danielle and her husband know this could be very serious.
You don't know at what point does it go from just being weird to being dangerous. What were his intentions? Who else was with him? A lot of these videos, we see one person. Is there more than one person involved? Where are they? What are they maybe armed with?
I wonder if he had a gun. I know he's naked, but it could have been behind the breezeway wall and could have pulled it out. You get nervous about what ifs, what this person was going to do next. There was concern that it could have been someone that was actually a peeping Tom in our neighborhood. There were so many what ifs about this that I didn't know which way it was going to be.
Could he have been someone that wanted to kidnap her, or are they a stalker?
For Danielle, it's a real fear. At the time, her life was very public because she was a reality TV star on the Bravo show Jersey Belle.
I'm a kick-ass publicist from Jersey that married the man of my dreams and wound up living in Mountain Brook, Alabama.
And this wouldn't be the first time her celebrity status had resulted in unwelcomed negative attention.
People would drive up, knock on my door, look in the windows. So it was a little creepy, just, as a public figure, I mean, of course, I knew that was part of it.
Celebrities tend to be magnets for weirdos. Unfortunately, a lot of celebrities are the victims of things like this.
And this time, Danielle's husband isn't interested in taking any chances.
It caused her husband to come out and confront this person.
My husband went out the door and tried to run after him.
If someone is willing to do something like that, what else are they willing to do?
Danielle's husband races after the intruder, but can't find him.
The guy, he panicked and ran down the street.
Now, the couple is scared.
My husband came back in the back door and came down the hallway running and yelling at me, "Danielle, Danielle." So that's when we immediately called the police to have them come out and look and make sure somebody wasn't still near our house or coming back.
When the police arrive, they comb the neighborhood looking for the nude man. But because of his mask, they aren't even sure who they're looking for.
But a case like this, we would hope that there would be additional video that might show the person before they put the mask on and before they come disrobed. And potentially if they're driving a vehicle, if we can get a description of the vehicle or the license plate.
They don't find any additional video. But it's only 40 degrees outside, so police don't think the man can get far without his clothes. Who is he? And where has he gone?
The police just said, we will do whatever we can to make sure y'all are safe.
The next morning, Danielle decides to help police by posting the doorbell footage on social media.
I posted it firstly on our neighborhood group, just to be aware that there's someone out there that possibly could come by their house, and on a public page of mine on Facebook and also on my Instagram.
Danielle tries to make light of things with captions like, "Interesting night in. Thank you, naked boy." But for the next few days, she's shaken.
I don't even want to leave my house. I mean, every time I was looking over my shoulder to see if anybody was around my car, worried that somebody would jump out behind my car.
Neighbors and fans are also worried.
A lot of women obviously follow me, and they were all concerned. "Danielle, please be careful." And we had multiple people stopping by. "Thank you so much for, posting this in our neighborhood so that we're aware. Have you had any updates? We're very concerned still." And we had this guy that stopped by and said, "I just want to show you this paperwork of a court date that's coming up. It's about a naked peeping Tom in our neighborhood that was arrested. He's not in jail right now, so he could have come back." So at that point, I got chills again. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared now.
Still, not all of the responses Danielle receives are supportive. Some people suggest that the whole story is a big, well-orchestrated fake.
That you have someone who's looking to make a bigger name for herself, because reality stars are looking for their 15 minutes and then another 15 minutes of fame.
The rumors infuriate Danielle.
That was just so far-fetched to say that it was a publicity stunt. It's something that I would never do.
Despite the naysayers, it takes no time before the video goes viral.
Captured on surveillance video outside their house.
Wearing only a Ronald Reagan mask.
And a few days later, Danielle and her husband get the break they were hoping for when a neighbor knocks on their door.
He said, "I actually know who did this, and it's nothing to be afraid of going forward."
The man tells Danielle that the intruder is actually just an embarrassed teenage boy from the neighborhood, a kid who got carried away with some friends. Danielle gives the information to police, but because he's underage, they don't release the suspect's name to the public.
We find out that this is a prank. It's a stupid prank.
I guess the boys decided to pull this prank on New Year's Eve and thought it would be funny.
But neither Danielle or authorities are amused by the prank. Because joke or not, the reality is it could have resulted in dire consequences.
Because of the danger potential. Alabama is what's referred to as a castle doctrine state, which basically means if the homeowners in Alabama feel threatened by someone who enters their property, and if they have firearms, they may end up shooting the person. That is a very potentially violent and deadly situation that could very well have ended very tragically for the prankster.
There was a couple of guys that stopped by and they were like, "Well, If he'd come on our property, I might have shot him.
On Facebook, Danielle writes a long, grateful post to inform everyone that the mystery man has been identified. But she and her husband decide not to press charges.
This young man could have been facing a number of charges, including public lewdness, stalking, and things of that nature.
I don't think, he realized we had cameras.
Still, Danielle isn't about to let him totally off the hook. She doesn't name him, but in public posts on her social media, she lets him know just how thoughtless his actions were.
I know it's a funny prank, but with a mask on like that, it is super scary. And I just wanted to let you know to be careful because it could have been a lot scarier than you think.
And Danielle's message does not fall on deaf ears.
A few days later, this high school boy came over with his father. He did say they were playing cards, and for some reason they have presidential masks when they were playing cards, and somebody had an idea to go knock on someone's door nude. I was a little bit mad. Why did they choose our house, and was it targeted to us? And he said, no, ma'am, this was just a house that was, at the corner and all your lights are on. And he just said, I'm so sorry for pulling this prank.
Now, both Danielle and police hope the incident serves as a warning.
It could have ended a lot worse than it did.
This was a situation that could have gone very differently if he had gone to just a few houses down the road from us.
The lessons are here is just to kind of be mindful of what you're doing. I mean, we were all teenagers once.
It was a warm Wednesday afternoon on July 18th, 1984. In San Ysidro, California, the rhythms of daily life unfolded with familiar certainty. The neighborhood, situated just north of the United States-Mexico border, had long been defined by movement. Families crossed the area on shopping trips. Workers ended long shifts before heading home, and travelers stopped briefly before continuing their journeys. The streets were busy but ordinary, filled with the sounds of passing traffic, conversations drifting from storefronts, and children enjoying another day of summer vacation. Among the many businesses that lined San Ysidro Boulevard stood a McDonald's restaurant, a place that, like thousands of others across America, represented something simple and comforting. Parents brought children there after errands. Teenagers gathered after work. Employees prepared hamburgers, filled drink cups, cleaned tables, and greeted customers with routines so familiar they barely required conscious thought. On that afternoon, no one inside could have imagined that within the next 77 minutes, the restaurant would become one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history. Long before investigators would examine evidence, before reporters filled television broadcasts with breaking news, and before the tragedy would reshape police responses to active shooter incidents across the United States, there was simply another ordinary afternoon. It is often the ordinary moments that make tragedies feel almost impossible to comprehend. Catastrophic events rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly, disguised as another day like countless others. That is perhaps what makes the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre so haunting even decades later. The victims had no warning. They were not gathered because of politics, conflict, or controversy. They were simply eating lunch, working afternoon shifts, or spending time with family. Their lives intersected only because they happened to be inside the same restaurant at the same moment. At approximately 3:56 p.m., a 41-year-old man named James Oliver Huberty parked his vehicle outside the restaurant. He carried 3 firearms and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. By the time the shooting finally ended, 21 innocent people would be dead, 19 others would be wounded, and one entire community would forever be defined by those 77 minutes. Yet before understanding what happened inside that McDonald's, it is necessary to understand the place itself and the people whose lives were forever changed. San Ysidro in 1984 was not a place that frequently appeared in national headlines. It was a hardworking border community where cultures blended naturally. Residents lived ordinary lives centered on family, work, and neighborhood routines. Because of its location, the area experienced a constant flow of visitors traveling between Mexico and Southern California. Businesses thrived by serving both locals and travelers, and restaurants such as McDonald's became gathering places where people of every age could share a meal. The restaurant itself looked much like every other McDonald's of its era. Bright colors, familiar golden arches, rows of tables, and the unmistakable smell of freshly prepared food created an atmosphere that encouraged customers to relax. Employees moved efficiently behind the counter while children laughed over Happy Meals and parents discussed everyday concerns. It was a place built around predictability. Every shift followed familiar routines. Every customer expected nothing more dramatic than deciding what to order from the menu. On that Wednesday afternoon, approximately 45 people occupied the restaurant. Some had arrived for a late lunch. Others had stopped for an early dinner. Families with young children sat together at tables. Employees worked through another busy shift, preparing food and serving customers as they had countless times before. Among them was 22-year-old assistant manager Neva Kane. Like many young adults working in fast food during the 1980s, she represented responsibility and optimism. She was supervising the afternoon shift, ensuring orders moved smoothly and customers were served quickly. None of the available evidence suggests she expected anything unusual that day. She simply reported for work, just as she had before. Other people inside represented every stage of life. Elderly customers stopped for a meal. Parents watched over children enjoying summer vacation. Young employees focused on their responsibilities behind the counter. There was also a pregnant woman spending time with her young niece. Nearby sat families with infants and small children. Outside, 3 boys rode bicycles through the parking lot, unaware that they were approaching unimaginable danger. They had no connection to one another beyond sharing the same location on the same afternoon. That random intersection of ordinary lives would become one of the defining characteristics of the tragedy. The victims were not selected because of who they were. According to investigators, there was never evidence that James Huberty personally knew any of them or held any specific grievance against the restaurant itself. Their only common characteristic was circumstance. They happened to be there. That truth continues to make the massacre especially difficult to understand. There was no warning directed toward those inside. No demands were issued. No negotiations took place. There was only chance. While the victims lived ordinary lives, James Oliver Huberty had spent years experiencing a very different reality. Born in Ohio in 1942, his early life was marked by illness. As a child, he suffered from polio, a disease that affected many children before widespread vaccination. The illness left him physically vulnerable during his youth and reportedly contributed to social isolation. According to people who knew him during those years, he struggled to form friendships and often remained withdrawn from others. Childhood experiences do not determine a person's future, but they can shape how someone views the world. In Huberty's case, acquaintances later described a man who increasingly distrusted those around him and preferred isolation over social connection. As an adult, Huberty married Etna Huberty, and together they raised 2 daughters. For years, he worked various jobs, including positions as a welder, security guard, and technician. These occupations reflected the life of an ordinary American worker trying to provide stability for his family. There is nothing in those job titles alone to suggest the violence that would later unfold. Like millions of others during periods of economic hardship, Huberty experienced repeated unemployment as industries changed and opportunities disappeared. During the early 1980s, economic conditions affected many manufacturing communities, including parts of Ohio where Huberty had lived. Losing steady employment created significant financial pressure on his family. Hoping to rebuild their lives, they relocated to California in search of better opportunities. The move represented optimism as much as necessity. California promised jobs, growth, and a fresh beginning. Instead, reality proved deeply disappointing. Employment remained difficult to secure. Savings steadily declined. Financial uncertainty became part of everyday life. According to those who knew him, Huberty grew increasingly angry and frustrated. The future he had imagined failed to materialize. Over time, those closest to him observed troubling behavioral changes. He became increasingly pessimistic and frequently expressed beliefs that people were watching him. He spoke about violence and catastrophic events, often suggesting that society itself was collapsing. His worldview appeared dominated by fear, suspicion, and resentment. Another detail repeatedly mentioned by acquaintances was his habit of carrying firearms. They recalled that he rarely left home without a weapon. Possessing firearms alone was not unusual in many parts of the United States during that period, but combined with his increasingly paranoid outlook, it became one element investigators later considered while reconstructing the events leading to July 18th. Perhaps the most unsettling development occurred only days before the massacre. Huberty reportedly told his wife that he believed he was mentally ill. Whether this reflected genuine awareness, fear, or another manifestation of his deteriorating state remains impossible to determine with certainty. What is known is that on July 17th, one day before the shooting, he contacted a mental health clinic seeking an appointment. During that call, an employee mistakenly recorded his surname as Schuberty instead of Huberty. Because of that error, the request was categorized as non-urgent, and no one contacted him before the following day. In the decades since, this administrative mistake has frequently been discussed as one of the tragedy's most heartbreaking details. Yet investigators and historians have consistently cautioned against drawing conclusions that cannot be supported by evidence. No one can say with certainty that a return phone call would have changed what happened. The error remains significant because it illustrates how tragedy often emerges from a series of events that, viewed individually, may appear small or unrelated. By the evening of July 17th, no police agency was searching for James Huberty. No emergency warning had been issued. No one outside his immediate family suspected that anything extraordinary would happen the next day. On the morning of July 18th, 1984, James Huberty did something remarkably ordinary. He spent time with his wife and daughters at the San Diego Zoo. For the family, it appeared to be another outing together, perhaps even an attempt to enjoy a brief escape from months of financial stress. Nothing in the available evidence indicates that those around them noticed anything alarming during the visit. Families walked through exhibits, children watched animals, and tourists filled the pathways under the California sun. It was a scene of everyday life, strikingly similar to the atmosphere that still existed inside the McDonald's restaurant across the city. Neither place offered the slightest indication that before the day was over, countless lives would be permanently altered. The ordinary routine continued for a few more hours. Then, after returning home, James Huberty quietly spoke words that would later become inseparable from one of America's darkest afternoons. His wife heard him say, "Society had their chance." Moments later, he added something even more chilling. He said he was going hunting. Then he embraced his wife and daughters, walked out the door, and drove away. None of them would ever see him alive again. James Oliver Huberty left his home carrying far more than the frustrations that had accumulated over years of unemployment, isolation, and growing paranoia. Inside his vehicle were 3 firearms, a 9mm Uzi, a Browning high-power 9mm pistol, a Winchester 12-gauge shotgun, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Investigators would later determine that he had equipped himself for a prolonged attack rather than a brief confrontation. Yet as he drove through San Diego that afternoon, other motorists saw nothing unusual. His vehicle blended into ordinary traffic. Red lights changed to green. Families continued shopping. Children played in front yards. Life moved forward with complete indifference to the violence that was quietly approaching. At one point during his drive, Huberty reportedly stopped near another commercial area before continuing on. Whatever thoughts occupied his mind during those minutes remain unknown. There is no surviving statement explaining why he rejected one location and eventually selected the McDonald's restaurant on San Isidro Boulevard. Investigators found no evidence suggesting he held any personal grudge against the business, its employees, or any of the customers who would soon become victims. The available evidence instead points toward a devastatingly random decision. The restaurant was busy, accessible, and filled with ordinary people. By choosing that location, Huberty ensured that complete strangers, people who had never heard his name and never imagined becoming part of a historic tragedy, would bear the consequences of his actions. At approximately 3:56 p.m., Huberty parked outside the McDonald's. Customers continued entering and leaving the restaurant as they had throughout the afternoon. Employees remained focused on preparing orders and cleaning tables. Families chatted while children ate meals and enjoyed the final weeks of summer vacation. Outside, 3 boys rode bicycles through the parking lot, unaware that they were approaching a place that would soon be surrounded by police officers and emergency vehicles. Huberty stepped from his vehicle carrying his shotgun. He wore dark clothing and camouflage-patterned trousers. To anyone who noticed him only briefly, he did not necessarily appear out of place. Southern California was a region where hunters, security personnel, and firearm owners were not uncommon. Some witnesses later recalled seeing him before he entered the building, but felt no immediate sense of alarm. There had been no warning signs visible to strangers during those final seconds. Then he crossed the threshold into the restaurant. According to the available accounts, Huberty immediately pointed the shotgun toward a 16-year-old employee. He pulled the trigger. The weapon malfunctioned. For a brief instant, confusion replaced fear. Some people reportedly assumed the incident was a practical joke or some kind of misunderstanding. A weapon failing to fire interrupted what otherwise would have been an immediate eruption of violence. That fleeting moment of uncertainty lasted only seconds. Huberty quickly recovered from the malfunction. He fired a shot into the ceiling, instantly transforming confusion into panic. The sound echoed through the restaurant, shattering the ordinary conversations that had filled the dining area only moments before. Customers looked around in disbelief. Employees froze. Parents instinctively turned toward their children. Before anyone fully understood what was happening, Huberty shifted to another firearm and opened fire. Among the first people struck was 22-year-old assistant manager Neva Kane. She had simply been doing her job, supervising another afternoon shift like countless others before it. Her death became one of the earliest and most tragic moments of the attack, symbolizing how quickly ordinary routines could disappear without warning. Immediately afterward, Huberty shouted a command that survivors would never forget. "Everybody on the ground." Those words echoed through the restaurant as chaos erupted. Within seconds, every person inside faced impossible decisions. Some dropped to the floor exactly as ordered, hoping compliance might save their lives. Others instinctively searched for exits. Parents reached for children. Employees ducked behind counters or kitchen equipment. Some people remained frozen in shock, unable to process what was unfolding before them. Human beings often imagine how they might react during emergencies, but reality rarely follows those expectations. Fear compresses time. Decisions are made in fractions of a second with little certainty about whether they are correct. Inside the McDonald's, every movement suddenly carried enormous consequences. The dining room that had moments earlier represented familiarity now became a place of confusion and desperation. Tables, chairs, counters, and walls became improvised shelter. Visibility changed constantly as people moved, crouched, or attempted to remain hidden. Huberty moved throughout the restaurant carrying multiple firearms. The attack continued without any indication that he intended to negotiate or issue demands. According to investigators, there was never evidence that this was a robbery or hostage situation. Instead, he fired indiscriminately at the people around him. Victims included employees, customers, elderly individuals, parents, and children. The absence of any identifiable pattern reinforced investigators' conclusion that the victims were selected solely by circumstance. Among the people inside was a pregnant woman who used her own body to shield her young niece. Even in moments of overwhelming fear, the instinct to protect loved ones remained stronger than self-preservation. Such acts remind us that while violence can reveal the darkest aspects of human behavior, it can also expose extraordinary courage. Nearby, children who had entered the restaurant expecting an ordinary afternoon suddenly found themselves surrounded by confusion they were too young to understand. A 9-year-old girl became one of the many victims caught in the indiscriminate attack. An 8-month-old infant sitting beside his mother also lost his life after crying during the incident. Outside, the 3 boys riding bicycles unknowingly entered the parking lot as the violence continued. They, too, became victims of tragedy entirely beyond their understanding or control. Their presence illustrates one of the most devastating realities of the massacre. Danger extended beyond the restaurant itself. The violence reached anyone unfortunate enough to be nearby. Inside, panic spread rapidly. Yet amid the chaos, some individuals survived through a combination of instinct, quick decisions, and extraordinary luck. According to available accounts, some remained completely still, hoping not to draw attention. Others hid beneath tables or behind equipment in the kitchen. A number managed to escape through secondary exits when brief opportunities appeared. None of these choices guaranteed survival. They simply reflected the desperate calculations people made while trying to stay alive. Every survivor later carried memories that would last a lifetime, shaped not only by what they witnessed, but also by the impossible decisions forced upon them within seconds. Meanwhile, outside the building, the first emergency calls began reaching authorities shortly after 4:00 p.m. Witnesses who had escaped or observed the attack from nearby desperately contacted emergency services, attempting to explain what they had seen. As often happens during unfolding crises, the initial information reaching dispatchers was fragmented and incomplete. Reports described gunfire at a McDonald's restaurant, but confusion over the exact location led to a critical mistake. Police units were initially dispatched to another McDonald's approximately 3 kilometers away. Although the error was corrected, those lost minutes became one of the most scrutinized aspects of the emergency response. Once officers reached the correct location, they encountered an extraordinarily complex situation. Gunfire was still coming from inside the restaurant. Officers did not know whether there was one shooter or several. They could not determine whether hostages remained alive inside or whether additional attackers might emerge from the building. Every decision carried enormous risk. Moving too quickly without understanding the situation might endanger innocent lives. Waiting too long could allow additional victims to be harmed. The tactical doctrines that would later guide responses to active shooter incidents had not yet fully developed. The officers confronting the San Isidro massacre were forced to make decisions using the training and information available at that moment. Police established a perimeter around the restaurant while attempting to assess the unfolding crisis. Emergency medical personnel positioned themselves nearby, prepared to assist victims as soon as conditions allowed. Snipers searched for positions that offered clear lines of sight through the restaurant's windows. But Huberty moved frequently inside the building, making a safe shot extremely difficult. Every passing minute increased the urgency. Yet firing without certainty risked striking innocent people who remained trapped inside. Outside, family members and witnesses watched helplessly as police vehicles surrounded the restaurant. Some desperately searched for loved ones. Others could only hope that those inside had somehow escaped. No one outside knew exactly how many victims there were or how much longer the attack would continue. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The sounds coming from within the restaurant offered constant reminders that the crisis was still unfolding. Inside, Huberty continued moving through the building, repeatedly changing between his firearms and reloading as necessary. According to investigators, he even turned on a portable radio during the attack before continuing the shooting. That unsettling detail later became one of many facts illustrating how prolonged and deliberate the assault had become. By then, the McDonald's restaurant no longer resembled the ordinary family establishment it had been only an hour earlier. Instead, it had become the center of one of the largest emergency responses San Diego had ever faced. While officers outside waited for the single opportunity that might finally bring the 77-minute nightmare to an end. By the time police had fully established a perimeter around the McDonald's restaurant on San Isidro Boulevard, the situation had become one of profound uncertainty. Officers arriving at the scene knew people were trapped inside, but almost every other critical detail remained unclear. Initial emergency calls had described gunfire, panic, and multiple victims. Yet the reports were fragmented and often contradictory. Some callers believed there was only one gunman. Others feared there could be several attackers moving throughout the building. There was also the possibility that hostages were still being held. In 1984, law enforcement agencies across the United States generally approached these situations very differently from modern active shooter responses. The prevailing strategy emphasized containing the scene, preventing the suspect from escaping, and carefully evaluating the risks before launching an assault. The priority was often to avoid creating additional casualties, particularly if innocent people remained inside. Standing outside the restaurant that afternoon, officers faced an impossible calculation. Every minute they waited could place more lives in danger. Yet rushing into a building without knowing the number of shooters, the layout of the threat, or the locations of survivors could also end in disaster. From outside, officers could hear gunfire continuing at irregular intervals. The sounds confirmed one terrible reality: the violence had not stopped. Inside, James Oliver Huberty continued moving through the restaurant, changing between his firearms as necessary and repeatedly reloading. Investigators would later determine that he had brought enough ammunition to sustain the attack for an extended period. According to the available evidence, he showed no intention of surrendering or communicating with police. There were no demands, no negotiations, and no identifiable objective beyond the continued attack itself. This absence of any clear motive or plan complicated the response even further. Officers had no way of predicting what he might do next, because his actions did not follow the patterns commonly associated with robberies, hostage situations, or barricaded suspects. While police searched for a safe opportunity to intervene, survivors inside the restaurant continued relying on instinct. Some remained motionless, hoping not to attract attention. Others stayed hidden beneath tables or behind equipment in the kitchen, uncertain whether moving would increase or reduce their chances of survival. Those who had managed to escape before the perimeter was established became important witnesses. Almost immediately, They described scenes of confusion, fear, and indiscriminate violence. Their accounts helped investigators begin forming a clearer picture of what was unfolding inside, though the full scope of the tragedy remained unknown until the shooting ended. Outside the restaurant, the parking lot gradually transformed into a massive emergency scene. Patrol vehicles blocked surrounding roads. Ambulances waited nearby, their crews prepared to enter as soon as police declared the building safe. News of the shooting spread rapidly throughout San Diego. Residents listening to local radio broadcasts began hearing reports of a major incident at a McDonald's restaurant near the border. Friends and relatives desperately tried to determine whether loved ones had been inside. Some hurried toward the area only to find roads closed and officers preventing anyone from approaching. The emotional toll extended far beyond those physically present inside the restaurant. Families stood behind police lines with no reliable information, forced to wait while uncertainty stretched minute after minute. For them, time seemed almost suspended. Every passing moment deepened anxiety because silence could mean anything. Some hoped the absence of information meant their relatives had escaped safely. Others feared the opposite. Inside the building, there was still no indication that Huberty intended to stop. Investigators later concluded that the victims had not been targeted because of personal relationships, occupations, or backgrounds. The evidence instead demonstrated that the attack was entirely indiscriminate. Employees, customers, elderly individuals, parents, children, and passers-by all faced the same random danger. This randomness would become one of the defining characteristics of the massacre, and one reason it continued to haunt investigators and survivors alike. Violence directed without personal motive often leave communities searching for explanations that may never exist. As officers evaluated the situation, trained marksmen searched continuously for a clear opportunity to engage the gunman. The task proved extraordinarily difficult. The restaurant's windows offered only limited visibility. Huberty rarely remained stationary for long. Every potential shot required certainty that innocent people would not be struck instead. Under those conditions, patience became both necessary and agonizing. Every second spent waiting represented another second in which lives remained at risk. Yet firing too early without a clear line of sight could create even greater tragedy. Finally, at approximately 5:17 p.m., more than an hour after the attack had begun, circumstances changed. A police sniper positioned on top of a nearby post office obtained an unobstructed view of Huberty, standing near one of the restaurant's windows. After evaluating the situation, the sniper fired a single round. The bullet struck Huberty in the chest. He collapsed immediately and died at the scene. With that one shot, the gunfire that had terrorized the community for 77 minutes finally came to an end. Even then, officers could not immediately assume the danger had passed, because earlier uncertainty had raised the possibility of multiple attackers. Law enforcement personnel entered the building cautiously. Specialized officers systematically cleared each section of the restaurant, ensuring no additional gunmen remained inside. Only after completing that search could emergency medical personnel fully enter to assist survivors and begin the difficult process of recovering those who had lost their lives. The restaurant that officers entered bore almost no resemblance to the family establishment it had been earlier that afternoon. It had become the scene of one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history up to that time. Investigators immediately began preserving evidence, photographing the scene, documenting the locations of weapons, and interviewing every available witness. Each detail would become essential in reconstructing exactly how the tragedy had unfolded. As the investigation progressed over the following hours and days, detectives confirmed that James Oliver Huberty had acted alone. No evidence indicated the involvement of accomplices or an organized plan extending beyond his individual actions. Likewise, investigators found no indication that he intended to escape after the shooting. The available evidence suggested that he expected the confrontation to end with his own death, an observation consistent with later theories that he may have intended to provoke police into killing him. Nevertheless, investigators remained careful not to present speculation as fact. Because Huberty died during the attack, many questions regarding his precise intentions could never be answered directly. Determining motive, therefore, became one of the investigation's greatest challenges. Detectives examined Huberty's personal history, employment records, family circumstances, and recent behavior that documented years of unemployment, financial hardship following the family's move from Ohio to California, increasing isolation, and repeated expressions of anger toward society. Witnesses described his growing paranoia, including beliefs that people were watching him and his frequent discussions of violence and societal collapse. Investigators also examined the events immediately preceding the massacre, including his statement to his wife that he believed he was mentally ill and his telephone call to a mental health clinic the day before the attack. The discovery that his surname had been recorded incorrectly, resulting in no return call before the shooting, attracted widespread public attention. For many observers, this detail became symbolic of opportunities that appeared tragically close, yet ultimately impossible to measure. Could one correctly documented phone call have altered history? The investigation could not answer that question, and responsible investigators refused to speculate beyond the available evidence. They acknowledged the mistake, but emphasized that no one could determine with certainty whether intervention at that stage would have prevented the massacre. Ultimately, investigators concluded that no single explanation adequately accounted for Huberty's actions. Instead, they identified several contributing factors supported by the available evidence: prolonged unemployment, severe financial stress, increasing paranoia, significant mental health concerns, profound anger toward society, and the possibility that he intended to die during the confrontation with police. At the same time, investigators emphasized what they did not find. They uncovered no evidence of a personal dispute involving McDonald's, no connection between Huberty and the victims, and no broader conspiracy. The attack appeared to have been directed not at specific individuals, but at whoever happened to occupy the restaurant that afternoon. That conclusion offered little comfort to grieving families, but it accurately reflected the evidence gathered during the investigation. The final casualty count revealed the full scale of the tragedy. 21 victims lost their lives during the attack, not including Huberty himself. Some accounts also recognize the unborn child of the pregnant victim, bringing the total to 22. 19 additional people suffered injuries, many of them carrying permanent physical and psychological consequences for the remainder of their lives. The victims ranged in age from just 8 months old to 74 years old, underscoring the indiscriminate nature of the violence. Because the gunman died at the scene, there would be no criminal trial. No courtroom testimony would establish motive through cross-examination. No jury would hear evidence or deliver a verdict. Many of the questions surrounding James Huberty's state of mind would therefore remain unanswered forever. Instead, the legacy of the San Isidro McDonald massacre will be defined not by legal proceedings, but by its lasting impact on survivors, grieving families, law enforcement practices, and a nation forced to reconsider how it responded when violence erupted without warning in places once considered unquestionably safe. When the immediate emergency ended on the evening of July 18, 1984, the work of understanding the tragedy had only just begun. For investigators, every photograph, every witness statement, and every piece of physical evidence represented another attempt to reconstruct 77 minutes that had permanently changed dozens of lives. For the families of the victims, however, the investigation existed alongside a much more painful reality. They were no longer asking what had happened inside the McDonald's restaurant. They were asking why their loved ones had been there at all, and why an ordinary afternoon had ended in unimaginable loss. Those questions would prove far more difficult to answer. In the days that followed, law enforcement officials carefully reviewed every stage of James Oliver Huberty's life that could be documented. They examined his employment history, his financial struggles, his relationships, and his increasingly disturbing behavior during the months leading up to the massacre. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances described a man whose outlook had steadily darkened. According to the information gathered during the investigation, Huberty had become deeply pessimistic about both his personal future and society as a whole. He frequently expressed beliefs that people were watching him, spoke about violence and catastrophic events, and often carried firearms whenever he left home. Investigators did not treat any single behavior as an explanation. Instead, they viewed these observations as pieces of a much larger picture, one that suggested a gradual deterioration rather than a sudden transformation. One of the most discussed aspects of the investigation centered on the telephone call Huberty made to a mental health clinic on July 17th, only one day before the massacre. According to the available records, he contacted the clinic seeking an appointment because he believed he was suffering from a serious mental health problem. During the call, however, an employee mistakenly recorded his surname as Schuberty instead of Huberty. Because of that clerical error, his request was categorized as a non-urgent matter, and no one contacted him before the following afternoon. As details of the mistake became public, many people viewed it as a heartbreaking example of how a seemingly small administrative error could become connected to an enormous tragedy. Yet investigators and mental health professionals consistently urged caution when discussing that possibility. Although the mistake undeniably occurred, there was no evidence proving that a correctly documented appointment or a return telephone call would have prevented what happened on July 18th. No one could know whether Huberty would have accepted treatment, attended an appointment, or changed his plans. The unanswered nature of that question became part of the larger story surrounding the massacre. Rather than offering a clear explanation, it highlighted how tragedies often leave behind painful possibilities instead of definite answers. Investigators also carefully considered Huberty's statements during the hours before the attack. His remark to his wife, "Society had their chance," became one of the most widely quoted pieces of evidence in the case. The words appeared to reflect profound anger and disillusionment, but even they failed to establish a precise motive. The statement did not identify any specific grievance, organization, or individual. Instead, it expressed a generalized hostility toward society itself. Shortly afterward, Huberty reportedly told his wife that he was going hunting before embracing his family and leaving the house. Those final interactions became significant because they suggested planning rather than spontaneity. He departed carrying multiple firearms and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, indicating preparation for a prolonged attack. At the same time, investigators found no evidence that he intended to flee afterward. Combined with the circumstances of the police confrontation, this observation contributed to one of the principal theories discussed during the investigation, that Huberty may have expected or even intended to die during the attack. Some investigators suggested the possibility of what is often described as suicide through confrontation with law enforcement. However, because Huberty was killed at the scene, he never provided any explanation for his actions. Consequently, investigators emphasized that this interpretation remained a theory supported by circumstances rather than a confirmed fact. The official investigation therefore stopped short of assigning a single definitive motive. Instead, authorities concluded that multiple contributing factors likely intersected. These included prolonged unemployment, severe financial hardship, increasing paranoia, significant mental health concerns, growing resentment toward society, and the possibility that he anticipated being killed by police. Importantly, investigators also documented what they did not discover. They found no evidence that Huberty had selected the McDonald's restaurant because of a personal dispute. There was no known connection between him and the employees working that afternoon. There was no indication that any of the customers had been specifically targeted. The victims were strangers whose lives happened to intersect with Huberty's decision to enter that particular restaurant. This conclusion reinforced one of the most unsettling aspects of the massacre. The violence had not been directed toward identifiable enemies. It had been directed toward ordinary people performing ordinary activities. Because Huberty died during the incident, there was no criminal prosecution. There would be no courtroom where prosecutors presented evidence before jury. There would be no defense attorneys challenging witness testimony or offering alternative explanations. No verdict would be announced because there was no defendant left to stand trial. In many criminal cases, courtroom proceedings provide families with an opportunity to hear evidence presented in chronological order, to understand investigative conclusions, and to witness a formal legal judgment. The San Ysidro massacre offered none of those experiences. The legal process ended the moment the sniper's bullet struck Huberty at approximately 5:17 p.m. on July 18th. For many survivors and relatives, the absence of a trial meant that some questions would remain permanently unresolved. There would never be an opportunity to hear Huberty explain his thinking, answer investigators' questions, or confront the consequences of his actions in court. The silence left behind by his death became another lasting feature of the tragedy. Even after investigators completed their work, uncertainty remained regarding the deepest reasons behind the attack. Yet while many questions lacked definitive answers, one consequence of the massacre became immediately apparent. Law enforcement agencies across the United States began reevaluating how officers should respond to situations involving ongoing mass shootings. At the time of the San Ysidro attack, the standard approach in many jurisdictions emphasized surrounding the location, containing the suspect, and waiting for specialized units whenever possible. The events of July 18th demonstrated the devastating limitations of that strategy when an attacker was actively targeting victims inside a public building. Over time, police departments developed what became known as active shooter response tactics. Rather than delaying intervention while establishing extended perimeters, officers increasingly received training emphasizing the rapid location and neutralization of the attacker in order to reduce further casualties. Although changes in policing evolved over many years and were influenced by multiple incidents, the San Ysidro massacre became one of the tragedies frequently cited as demonstrating the need for a different tactical philosophy. The attack therefore influenced not only the community where it occurred, but also law enforcement practices throughout the country. The McDonald's restaurant itself never reopened. For residents of San Ysidro, the building had become inseparable from the memories of those 77 minutes. Community members opposed the idea of returning the site to normal commercial use, believing that doing so would disregard the suffering experienced there. Eventually, the original structure was demolished. In its place, the land became a memorial dedicated to the victims whose lives ended that afternoon. A new McDonald's restaurant was later constructed at a different location within the area, allowing the community to move forward without asking families to revisit the exact site of the tragedy during ordinary daily life. Every year, on July 18th, survivors, relatives, local residents, and community leaders continue to remember those who never return home. The memorial does not celebrate the event or the man responsible for it. Instead, it serves as a place where names are remembered, lives are honored, and the focus remains on the people whose futures were taken away. That distinction matters because history often risks allowing perpetrators to overshadow victims. In the case of the San Isidro McDonald's massacre, the true story belongs not to James Oliver Huberty, but to the 21 people who lost their lives. The 19 survivors who carried lasting physical and emotional wounds, and the countless family members whose lives changed forever in a single afternoon. More than 4 decades have passed since July 18, 1984, yet the questions raised by the massacre remain painfully relevant. How should society recognize severe mental health crises before they become catastrophic? How can communities support individuals experiencing profound isolation without assuming that every troubled person poses a danger? How should emergency responders balance caution with the urgent need to stop ongoing violence? These questions have no simple answers, but they continue to shape discussions among policymakers, law enforcement professionals, mental health experts, and the public. The San Isidro McDonald's massacre was one of the earliest mass shootings to force the nation into confronting those issues on a large scale. It became more than a criminal investigation. It became a turning point that influenced emergency response strategies, public awareness, and conversations about violence that continue decades later. Yet beyond policy, tactics, and investigative reports lies a far simpler truth. On the afternoon of July 18, 1984, dozens of ordinary people entered a neighborhood restaurant expecting nothing more than a meal, another work shift, or a brief stop during an otherwise ordinary day. They did not know they were about to become part of American history. They did not choose that role, nor did their families. The 77 minutes that followed transformed a familiar restaurant into a symbol recognized across the nation. But history should remember far more than the violence itself. It should remember the ordinary lives interrupted without warning, the courage shown by people protecting those they loved, the survivors who carried unimaginable memories into every year that followed, and the enduring determination of an entire community to ensure that the victims, not the man who caused their suffering, remain at the center of the story. 77 minutes ended that afternoon. For the families, the survivors, and the people of San Isidro, the echoes of those minutes have never truly disappeared. More than 4 decades have passed since the events of July 18, 1984. Yet the San Isidro McDonald's massacre continues to occupy a significant place in the history of violent crime in the United States. Unlike many criminal cases that gradually fade from public memory after arrests, trials, and appeals conclude, this tragedy never followed the familiar path of the justice system. James Oliver Huberty died at the scene, taking with him the only complete explanation for what he intended, what he believed, and what ultimately drove him to carry out one of the deadliest mass shootings in America at that time. What remained instead were police reports, witness statements, investigative findings, and the memories of those who survived. Those records tell a story that is not simply about violence, but about ordinary lives interrupted in an instant, questions left unanswered, and lessons that continue to influence emergency response decades later. One of the most enduring characteristics of the San Isidro massacre is the absence of a definitive motive. Investigators devoted considerable effort to examining Huberty's background, searching for evidence that might explain why he chose that particular restaurant on that particular afternoon. They reviewed his employment history, documented the financial hardships that followed years of unemployment, studied his increasingly paranoid behavior, and reconstructed his final days before the attack. They noted his growing belief that society was collapsing, his repeated expressions of anger, and his conviction that people were watching him. They also considered the fact that he believed he was mentally ill and had attempted to seek help the day before the massacre. Yet, after examining every available piece of evidence, investigators reached a conclusion that remains important today. There was no single explanation capable of fully accounting for what happened. Instead, they identified a combination of contributing factors, including prolonged unemployment, financial stress, paranoia, apparent mental health struggles, resentment toward society, and the possibility that Huberty expected to die during the confrontation with police. Just as important as what investigators found was what they did not find. They discovered no evidence that Huberty personally knew any of the victims. There was no indication that he held a grievance against McDonald's as a company or against the employees working that afternoon. There was no sign of political motivation, organized conspiracy, or personal revenge directed toward those inside the restaurant. The victims had been selected entirely by circumstance. They happened to be present when Huberty decided to begin his attack. That randomness remains one of the most painful aspects of the case because it reminds us that the people who lost their lives were not targeted for anything they had done. Their only connection was sharing the same place at the same moment. The victims represented nearly every stage of life. Among those killed were employees beginning their careers, parents spending time with children, elderly customers enjoying an ordinary meal, young people on summer vacation, and even an 8-month-old infant. One pregnant woman died while attempting to protect her young niece, an act that reflected remarkable courage in circumstances that no one should ever have to face. 3 boys riding bicycles outside the restaurant also became victims after unknowingly entering the parking lot during the attack. Their stories, though brief within the historical record, illustrate the indiscriminate nature of the violence. The massacre did not remain confined within the restaurant's walls. It reached beyond them, affecting anyone unfortunate enough to be nearby. 19 other people survived with injuries, many carrying lifelong physical disabilities and psychological trauma. For survivors of mass violence, the end of the emergency rarely marks the end of suffering. Physical wounds may heal over time, but emotional recovery often follows a far longer and more uncertain path. Every ordinary sound resembling sudden danger, every return to public spaces, and every anniversary of the event can revive memories that remain vivid despite the passage of years. While the available evidence does not provide detailed personal accounts from every survivor, the documented fact that many experienced lifelong trauma reflects a reality common to events of this magnitude. Survival does not erase what was witnessed. It simply means living with memories that cannot easily be forgotten. The San Ysidro community also faced the difficult challenge of deciding what should become of the restaurant itself. Buildings where tragedies occur often become powerful symbols, making it nearly impossible for local residents to view them as ordinary places again. In this case, the original McDonald's never reopened. Community members opposed the idea of returning the location to routine commercial use, believing that doing so would overlook the profound loss experienced there. Eventually, the building was demolished. Rather than attempting to erase history, the community chose to reshape it into a place of remembrance. A memorial now occupies the site where the restaurant once stood, ensuring that visitors remembered the people whose lives ended there rather than the commercial building that happened to contain the tragedy. A new McDonald's was later constructed elsewhere in the area, allowing the business to continue serving the community without asking families to revisit the original location during everyday life. Every year, remembrance ceremonies bring together survivors, relatives, neighbors, and local officials. These gatherings serve a purpose beyond mourning. They affirm that the names and lives of the victims remain central to the history of July 18, 1984. True crime narratives often risk focusing disproportionately on perpetrators, inadvertently granting them a lasting notoriety they neither deserve nor should receive. The San Ysidro Massacre demonstrates why a different approach matters. James Oliver Huberty's actions occupy only 77 minutes of recorded history. The victims, by contrast, lived entire lives before that afternoon. They had families, responsibilities, dreams, friendships, and plans extending far beyond a single day in July. Remembering them restores balance to a story that could otherwise become consumed by the individual responsible for their deaths. Beyond its human cost, the massacre also altered law enforcement thinking across the United States. Prior to incidents such as San Ysidro, police agencies often emphasize containing dangerous situations while waiting for specialized tactical units whenever possible. That strategy reflected the belief that careful planning reduced unnecessary risks during hostage situations or armed confrontations. The events of July 18th exposed the limitations of that approach when faced with an attacker actively harming victims inside a public space. During the 77 minutes of the massacre, officers confronted uncertainty regarding the number of suspects, the presence of hostages, and the safest opportunity to intervene. Those circumstances later became part of broader discussions within policing about whether faster engagement might reduce casualties during ongoing attacks. Over time, American law enforcement agencies increasingly developed active shooter response strategies emphasizing rapid movement toward the threat rather than prolonged containment. Although these tactical changes evolved gradually and were influenced by multiple tragedies over many years, the San Ysidro Massacre remains one of the landmark incidents frequently referenced in discussions of that transformation. Its legacy, therefore, extends beyond the community where it occurred, influencing training, emergency planning, and public safety policies nationwide. Another enduring lesson concerns the complexity of mental health discussions following acts of mass violence. Huberty's unsuccessful attempt to obtain a mental health appointment one day before the massacre has understandably drawn considerable attention. Yet the case also illustrates why caution is essential when interpreting such events. Most individuals experiencing mental health challenges never commit acts of violence, and investigators themselves acknowledge that there is no evidence proving a return phone call would have prevented the tragedy. Responsible analysis, therefore, avoids simplistic conclusions. The San Ysidro Massacre cannot be explained by a single missed appointment, just as it cannot be explained solely by unemployment, financial hardship, or paranoia. Instead, it reflects a convergence of multiple factors that investigators believed likely contributed to Huberty's deteriorating condition without providing a complete explanation. Accepting uncertainty is often one of the most difficult aspects of studying true crime. Society naturally seeks clear causes because clear causes appear to promise clear solutions. Yet some tragedies resist that desire. The San Ysidro McDonald's Massacre remains one of those cases. Even after decades of analysis, the central question, why this happened on that particular afternoon, cannot be answered with complete certainty. Perhaps that uncertainty is itself an important reminder. Human behavior is often more complicated than any single theory can explain. Investigations can establish timelines, document evidence, identify contributing circumstances, and eliminate unsupported speculation. They cannot always reveal every thought that existed within the mind of a person who never lived to answer questions. As historians, investigators, and storytellers revisit July 18, 1984, the responsibility remains the same: to distinguish carefully between documented fact and assumption, to remember that every statistic represents a human life, and to resist allowing the perpetrator's actions to overshadow the people whose futures were taken away. 77 Minutes transformed a neighborhood restaurant into a permanent chapter of American history. But the true legacy of the San Isidro McDonald's massacre is not found in the weapons that were carried, the duration of the attack, or even the records it set at the time. Its legacy lives in the families who continue remembering loved ones, the survivors who rebuilt their lives despite unimaginable trauma, the community that chose remembrance over forgetting, and the changes in emergency response that sought to reduce the likelihood of similar tragedies in the future. The massacre stands today not as a story of notoriety, but as a solemn reminder that ordinary places can become extraordinary scenes of loss without warning, and that the most meaningful way to honor history is to keep the focus where it has always belonged, on the innocent people whose lives forever changed on a warm Wednesday afternoon in San Isidro, California. Looking back on July 18th, 1984, it is tempting to view the San Isidro McDonald's massacre solely through the lens of history, as one more tragic event recorded in books, documentaries, and investigative archives. The passing of time can create the illusion of distance, making even the most devastating moments seem confined to another era. Yet for the people directly affected, history is not something left behind. It continues through memories carried by survivors, through photographs preserved by families, through annual memorial gatherings, and through the quiet absence left by those who never came home. The 77 minutes that unfolded inside a neighborhood restaurant did not end when the final gunshot was fired. Their consequences continued into every day that followed, shaping lives, institutions, and the national conversation about public safety for decades to come. One of the most remarkable aspects of the San Isidro tragedy is how completely ordinary the day had appeared before violence erupted. The victims were not participating in a controversial event. They were not gathered for a political rally or involved in any confrontation. They represented everyday life in its most familiar form. Employees were working another afternoon shift. Families had stopped for lunch or an early dinner. Children enjoyed summer vacation with parents or relatives. Elderly customers shared meals in a place they likely considered safe and predictable. Even the location itself symbolized routine. McDonald's restaurants had become fixtures of American communities, associated with family outings, birthday celebrations, road trips, and inexpensive meals. Few public places seemed more ordinary. That sense of normalcy made the attack especially difficult for people across the United States to comprehend. If such violence could occur there, it challenged long-held assumptions about where people could reasonably expect to feel secure. News coverage in the days following the massacre reflected not only grief, but also disbelief. Across the country, people struggled to understand how an ordinary restaurant filled with families had become the setting for one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history at that time. The scale of the tragedy forced many to confront questions that previously seemed almost unimaginable. How should police respond when violence is actively unfolding instead of waiting for negotiations? What warning signs should family members, friends, employers, or healthcare providers recognize before a crisis reaches its most catastrophic point? Could similar attacks happen elsewhere? These questions did not disappear after the headlines faded. Instead, they became part of broader national discussions that continued evolving in the years that followed. Although no single event transforms public policy by itself, the San Isidro Massacre became one of several pivotal incidents influencing how communities prepared for emergencies involving active shooters. Law enforcement agencies increasingly recognized that traditional containment strategies, while appropriate for many hostage situations, could prove inadequate when a gunman was actively targeting victims. The lessons learned from San Isidro contributed to the gradual development of response models, emphasizing immediate action to stop ongoing violence. Those tactical changes have since become standard practice in many jurisdictions, illustrating how painful experience often shapes future preparedness. Yet tactical evolution represents only one part of the massacre's legacy. Equally important is the human lesson concerning remembrance. Public attention naturally gravitates toward perpetrators because their actions create the events that become historical records. However, allowing the perpetrator to dominate the narrative risks obscuring the lives that were interrupted. James Oliver Huberty occupies a central place in the factual chronology of July 18th, but he should not occupy the moral center of the story. The moral center belongs to the 21 people who lost their lives, the 19 individuals who survived with lasting injuries, and the families whose futures changed forever because of one man's actions. Every victim entered the restaurant with expectations extending beyond that afternoon. Employees anticipated finishing work and returning home. Parents expected to continue raising children. Children expected another day of summer vacation. Elderly customers expected to leave after a meal and resume ordinary routines. None of them knew that history would remember the location where they happened to be sitting. Their futures extended far beyond the walls of that restaurant until those futures were abruptly taken away. Remembering this truth prevents the tragedy from becoming merely a collection of statistics. 21 deaths and 19 injuries are important facts, but numbers alone cannot capture what was truly lost. Every statistic represents relationships, conversations never completed, milestones never reached, and ordinary moments that families expected to share in the years ahead. That human perspective also explains why the memorial, now standing on the former restaurant site, remains so significant. It transforms a location once associated with horror into a place dedicated to memory and reflection. Rather than preserving the building where the violence occurred, the community chose to preserve the memory of those who suffered there. This decision reflects an understanding that remembrance should honor lives rather than immortalize the setting of their loss. Visitors who come to the memorial are reminded not simply that a crime occurred, but that real people lived, loved, worked, and dreamed before becoming part of an event remembered around the world. Every annual gathering held on July 18th reinforces that commitment. Survivors, relatives, neighbors, and community members continue returning not to relive the violence, but to ensure that the victims are never reduced to anonymous names in historical records. Time inevitably changes communities. Businesses close, new families move into neighborhoods, and younger generations grow up without firsthand memories of earlier tragedies. Memorials, therefore, serve an essential purpose. They connect present and future generations to events that shape the communities they inherit. They remind visitors that history is composed not only of major political decisions and famous leaders, but also of ordinary people whose lives deserve to be remembered with dignity. The San Ysidro Massacre also demonstrates the importance of responsible storytelling. True crime has become one of the world's most popular forms of nonfiction, attracting audiences fascinated by criminal investigations, forensic evidence, and unresolved mysteries. Yet popularity creates responsibility. Stories involving real victims should never become entertainment detached from human consequences. The goal of examining cases such as San Ysidro is not to celebrate violence or grant lasting notoriety to those responsible. Instead, careful storytelling seeks understanding while preserving respect for those whose lives were forever changed. That responsibility requires distinguishing documented facts from speculation, acknowledging uncertainty where evidence does not exist, and resisting the temptation to invent dramatic details simply because unanswered questions remain. In the San Ysidro case, many uncertainties persist. no definitive motive was ever established. No courtroom testimony clarified Huberty's thinking because he died before facing trial. Investigators identified contributing factors, but they could not provide complete certainty regarding his intentions. Accepting those limitations reflects intellectual honesty. Not every tragedy offers satisfying explanations. Sometimes the most accurate conclusion is that evidence can take us only so far. Recognizing uncertainty does not weaken the historical record. It strengthens it by separating verified fact from assumption. Another lasting lesson concerns the fragility of ordinary life. Human beings naturally develop routines because routines provide comfort and predictability. We visit familiar restaurants, drive familiar roads, and expect familiar outcomes from everyday activities. Events such as the San Isidro Massacre remind us that certainty can disappear without warning. Yet they also reveal something equally important about human resilience. Despite overwhelming loss, survivors continued rebuilding their lives. Families preserved the memories of loved ones. Communities created places of remembrance rather than surrendering entirely to grief. Law enforcement agencies examined painful experiences in order to improve future responses. These acts cannot erase tragedy, but they demonstrate humanity's capacity to respond to suffering with determination instead of despair. Today, visitors driving through San Isidro may see a busy community much like the one that existed in 1984. People continue crossing the nearby border. Families continue shopping, eating together, and building ordinary lives. Children laugh in parks. Businesses open each morning. Daily routines persist because communities cannot remain frozen in moments of tragedy forever. Yet beneath that ordinary rhythm lies a collective memory shared by those who remember what happened. On that warm Wednesday afternoon, the community moved forward, but it did not forget. That balance between remembrance and resilience may be the most enduring legacy of all. The San Isidro McDonald's massacre changed policing, influenced emergency response strategies, and became a defining chapter in the history of mass violence in the United States. Those historical consequences matter, but perhaps its greatest lesson lies elsewhere. It reminds us that behind every headline are ordinary people whose lives deserve to be remembered, not because of the way they died, but because of the lives they were living before violence interrupted them. On July 18, 1984, 21 innocent people lost futures they expected to have. 19 others carried visible and invisible scars into the decades that followed. Their families endured grief measured not in days or years, but across lifetimes. The community of San Isidro transformed a place of unimaginable loss into a place of remembrance, ensuring that history would continue speaking the names of the victims rather than allowing them to disappear beneath the weight of statistics. 77 minutes forever altered one California neighborhood. The memory of those 77 minutes continues to remind future generations that compassion, vigilance, responsible storytelling, and respect for victims remain essential long after investigations conclude and headlines fade. That, more than anything else, is the enduring legacy of the San Isidro McDonald's massacre. As the story of the San Isidro McDonald's massacre reaches its conclusion, one truth becomes impossible to ignore: some events resist complete understanding, no matter how thoroughly they are investigated. Detectives can reconstruct timelines down to the minute, identify the weapons that were used, interview witnesses, preserve physical evidence, and document every confirmed fact. Historians can compare records, journalists can revisit archives, and researchers can analyze the circumstances from countless perspectives. Yet even after decades of careful examination, there remains a space between documented evidence and the private thoughts that existed only inside the mind of James Oliver Huberty. that space can never be fully closed. It reminds us that while criminal investigations are designed to establish facts, they cannot always answer every question that grief demands. The families who lost loved ones on July 18, 1984, were left with a reality that no investigative report could change. For them, the tragedy was never measured by statistics alone. 21 victims represented 21 individual lives, each with personal histories, relationships, ambitions, and ordinary routines that ended without warning. 19 surviving victims represented 19 people forced to continue living with memories that could never be erased. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering that followed carried the unmistakable absence of someone who should have been there. These are the consequences of mass violence that cannot be fully captured in official records. Police reports describe events. Medical records document injuries. News broadcasts summarize facts. But only families understand the countless ordinary moments that disappear forever when a loved one is taken unexpectedly. It is those invisible losses that often become the longest-lasting legacy of tragedies like San Isidro. During the years since the massacre, countless people have attempted to understand what warning signs, if any, might have foreshadowed the attack. James Huberty's worsening financial situation, increasing isolation, paranoid beliefs, frequent discussions about violence, and unsuccessful attempt to obtain a mental health appointment have all been examined repeatedly. These details form an important part of the historical record because they help investigators understand the circumstances preceding the crime. At the same time, they also illustrate the limitations of hindsight. After a tragedy occurs, earlier events often appear more significant because people already know the outcome. Before July 18th, however, those same observations existed separately rather than as parts of a completed narrative. Family members, neighbors, co-workers, and acquaintances saw fragments of a troubled man, but none possessed complete knowledge of what would happen the following afternoon. This distinction remains important because hindsight can unintentionally create the impression that catastrophic events were inevitable when, in reality, people living through those moments rarely possess the clarity available after history has already unfolded. The unanswered questions surrounding Huberty's mental state have also shaped discussions about the relationship between mental health and acts of extreme violence. Responsible analysis requires recognizing both the documented facts and their limitations. The evidence shows that Huberty believed he was mentally ill and sought an appointment at a mental health clinic. The evidence also shows that an administrative error resulted in his request not receiving an immediate response. Beyond those facts, however, certainty ends. Investigators never concluded that one returned telephone call would have prevented the massacre, because no evidence could support such a conclusion. Likewise, they avoided reducing the tragedy to a single explanation. Instead, they described a combination of circumstances that may have contributed to Huberty's actions without claiming that any individual factor alone caused the attack. This careful approach reflects one of the central responsibilities of both investigators and historians: resisting simple answers when the evidence supports only complexity. The San Isidro Massacre also occupies an important place in the evolution of emergency response in the United States. Although later incidents would continue influencing police tactics, July 18, 1984, became one of the early events demonstrating the unique challenges presented by an active shooter who continued attacking victims over an extended period. Officers arriving at the scene faced uncertainty regarding the number of attackers, the possibility of hostages, and the safest method of intervention. Working within the tactical doctrine of the era, they established a perimeter while searching for an opportunity to stop the gunman without increasing the danger to innocent people. Ultimately, A police sniper ended the attack with a single shot after obtaining a clear line of sight. In the years that followed, law enforcement agencies increasingly reevaluated whether waiting for specialized units always represented the safest approach when victims remained under immediate threat. The development of modern active shooter response strategies owes much to lessons learned through painful experiences such as San Isidro. While no training program can eliminate tragedy entirely, each lesson incorporated into future emergency planning represents an effort to reduce loss whenever similar crises occur. Beyond policing and public policy, however, the case leaves behind another lesson that is perhaps even more enduring. It reminds us how deeply interconnected ordinary lives can be. The people inside the McDonald's restaurant did not know one another because they shared extraordinary experiences. They shared an ordinary afternoon. Some were employees beginning another shift. Others were customers stopping for a meal. Parents accompanied children. Elderly patrons enjoyed lunch. Teenagers worked behind the counter. A pregnant woman spent time with her niece. 3 boys rode bicycles through the parking lot. None of them expected history to remember where they happened to be that day. Yet their stories became permanently connected by a single act of violence committed by someone they have never met. This randomness continues to distinguish the San Isidro massacre from crimes motivated by personal disputes or targeted revenge. The victims were not chosen because of who they were. They were chosen only because they happened to be present. That reality challenges one of humanity's deepest assumptions, that ordinary routines provide a reasonable expectation of safety. It is precisely because the restaurant represented such a familiar place that the tragedy resonated so profoundly across the nation. If violence could reach a neighborhood restaurant filled with families, then the sense of security associated with everyday public spaces became more fragile than many people had previously imagined. Yet the story does not end with fear. It also contains examples of remarkable humanity. Parents instinctively shielded children. A pregnant woman protected her young niece despite extraordinary danger. Survivors remained hidden, helping preserve hope under impossible circumstances. Emergency responders moved toward danger rather than away from it. Medical personnel waited nearby, prepared to assist victims the moment police declared the building secure. Community members later chose remembrance instead of forgetting, transforming the site into a memorial dedicated to the victims. These actions remind us that while violence can expose profound cruelty, it can also reveal extraordinary courage, compassion, and resilience. History should remember both realities, not merely the darker one. Every July 18th, ceremonies held at the memorial reinforce that commitment. Flowers, moments of silence, and quiet reflection replace the sounds of panic that once filled the area. Time has changed the physical landscape. The original restaurant is gone, replaced by a place intended to honor lives rather than preserve the setting of their loss. Nearby, the community continues its daily routines. Families eat together in restaurants. Children play. Businesses open each morning. Travelers continue passing through San Isidro as they have for generations. Life, despite unimaginable interruption, continues moving forward. That continuity does not erase grief. Instead, it demonstrates one of the strongest qualities any community can possess: the ability to remember without allowing tragedy to become its only identity. For those who study true crime, the San Isidro McDonald's massacre serves as an enduring reminder that the most important stories are rarely about perpetrators. Criminal acts may capture headlines, but victims define the human meaning of those events. Responsible storytelling, therefore, places its greatest attention not on sensational details or speculation, but on preserving accuracy, respecting evidence, and honoring the people whose lives were forever changed. The available record tells us what happened. It tells us when the attack began, how long it lasted, what weapons were carried, how police responded, and how the incident concluded. It also tells us something equally important. There is no evidence that the victims had done anything to invite or deserve what happened. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives. That truth deserves to remain at the center of every retelling. More than 40 years after the massacre, the names of the victims continue to be remembered, not because history should remain trapped in sorrow, but because remembrance affirms their humanity. They were more than entries in investigative files. They were sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, grandparents, co-workers, neighbors, friends, and children whose futures extended far beyond a summer afternoon in 1984. Those futures were stolen, but their memories endure through the families who love them, the community that honors them, and the historical record that refuses to let them be forgotten. In the end, the San Isidro McDonald's massacre is not merely a story about 77 minutes of violence. It is a story about the value of ordinary life, the importance of careful investigation, the necessity of learning from tragedy without exploiting it, and the enduring responsibility to remember victims with dignity. Long after headlines disappeared and investigations concluded, those lessons remain. They ask every generation not simply to remember what happened on July 18, 1984, but to remember why the lives lost that day continue to matter. That remembrance is the final chapter of this story, and it is the chapter that deserves to last the longest. The passage of time often changes the way societies remember tragedy. The immediate aftermath of a catastrophic event is defined by urgency, emergency responses, investigations, grieving families, and communities searching for answers. Years later, the focus shifts. The questions become broader. What do people learn? How did institutions change? How should future generations remember those who were lost? The San Isidro McDonald's massacre remains significant not only because of the number of lives lost, but because it forced American society to confront difficult realities about public safety, emergency response, mental health, and the unpredictable nature of mass violence. More than 4 decades later, the event continues to serve as both a historical record and a warning about the consequences of ignoring signs of crisis, while also reminding people of the importance of compassion, preparedness, and remembrance. One of the most difficult aspects of studying the massacre is accepting that there was no simple explanation waiting at the end of the investigation. People naturally search for a single cause when faced with an act of extreme violence. They want to identify the exact moment when everything changed, the precise reason why one person made the decision to harm innocent strangers, or the one intervention that could have prevented disaster. But the investigation into James Oliver Huberty's actions revealed a much more complicated reality. His behavior developed over time through multiple circumstances rather than one isolated event. Investigators identified unemployment, financial hardship, increasing anger, paranoia, and apparent mental health struggles as factors that contributed to his deteriorating condition. However, they could not point to one specific moment and declare that it alone created the tragedy. This uncertainty is not a failure of investigation. It is a reflection of the complexity of human behavior. Some questions simply remain unanswered, especially when the person responsible never survives to explain his own thoughts. Because Huberty died at the scene, there was never a trial where prosecutors could present evidence. Witnesses could testify under oath, or a judge could issue a final judgment. In many criminal cases, the courtroom becomes the place where society attempts to create a complete narrative. Evidence is presented, arguments are challenged, and responsibility is formally established. The San Isidro massacre followed a different path. The responsibility was clear, but the deeper motivations remained partially unknown. The absence of a trial created a different kind of unresolved ending. Families received confirmation of what happened, but they never received answers to every question they carried. They never heard Huberty explain why he chose that restaurant, why he selected those people, or what he believed he was accomplishing. The silence left behind became part of the tragedy itself. The case also changed the way Americans viewed violence in public spaces. Before the 1980s, many people associated violent crime with specific circumstances, such as personal disputes, criminal activity, or conflicts between individuals who knew one another. The San Ysidro massacre challenged that assumption. The victims were not involved in a dispute. They were not connected to the attacker. They were simply present. That realization created a new awareness that violence could occur in places previously considered ordinary and safe. Restaurants, shopping areas, schools, workplaces, and other public locations became part of a national conversation about preparedness and response. The massacre was one of the events that contributed to a growing understanding that emergency planning needed to address situations where a person actively attacks strangers in a crowded public environment. Law enforcement agencies examined their response carefully after the tragedy. The officers who arrived at the scene faced a situation for which there was no simple solution. They did not know exactly how many attackers were inside. They did not know how many victims remain alive. They did not know whether moving quickly into the building would save lives or create additional casualties. Their decisions reflected the training and tactical approaches available at the time. In later years, police departments across the United States developed new strategies based on lessons from San Ysidro and other mass casualty events. Active shooter response training increasingly emphasized the importance of quickly stopping the source of danger when innocent people remain under immediate threat. The goal was not to criticize the actions of individual officers during past tragedies, but to learn from difficult experiences and improve future responses. Every improvement in emergency planning represents an attempt to prevent future communities from experiencing similar losses. However, while discussions about tactics and policy are important, they should never overshadow the human reality at the center of the event. The victims of the San Ysidro massacre were not symbols or statistics. They were individuals with complete lives beyond the moment when history recorded their deaths. They had families who loved them, people who depended on them, and personal stories that existed long before July 18, 1984. Their identities should not be defined only by the circumstances of their deaths. A responsible remembrance of the massacre requires looking beyond the tragedy and recognizing the lives that came before it. The employees working at the restaurant were not simply victims inside a crime scene. They were workers with daily responsibilities, relationships, and plans. The customers were not just names in an investigation report. They were parents, relatives, neighbors, and friends. The children who died were not merely the youngest victims of a violent event. They were children who should have had decades of life ahead of them. The elderly victims were not simply part of a casualty count. They were people who had already lived long lives filled with experiences, memories, and connections. Each person represented an entire world to those who knew them. This understanding is why memorials matter. They provide a physical place where grief can exist, where names can be spoken, and where future generations can learn what happened. The memorial at the former restaurant site represents more than a marker of tragedy. It represents the community's decision about how history should be preserved. The focus is not on the building, the weapons, or the person who caused the violence. The focus is on the people who were lost. By transforming the location into a place of remembrance, the community ensured that the site would communicate a message of respect rather than fear. Survivors also represent an essential part of the story. While the deaths received national attention, those who lived through the attack faced their own difficult journeys afterward. Surviving a traumatic event does not mean leaving it behind. Many survivors carried memories of fear, confusion, and loss long after the physical danger ended. Their experiences demonstrate that the consequences of mass violence extend beyond the immediate scene. Trauma can continue through years, affecting personal relationships, emotional health, and a person's sense of safety in everyday environments. The fact that survivors continued moving forward reflects remarkable resilience. But it also reminds society of the responsibility to support those affected long after media attention disappears. Another important lesson from the San Ysidro massacre involves how society discusses individuals experiencing severe personal crises. After the attack, attention focused heavily on Huberty's behavior before the shooting, including his beliefs that he was being watched, his expressions of anger, and his attempt to seek mental health assistance. These details remain relevant because they show that crises often develop through a series of warning signs rather than appearing without any history. At the same time, the case also demonstrates why generalizations can be dangerous. Most people experiencing mental health challenges are not violent. A careful understanding of the tragedy requires recognizing both realities. Serious crises deserve attention and support, but mental health struggles alone do not explain or predict violent actions. The responsibility of society is not to create fear around those seeking help, but to improve systems that allow people in crisis to receive appropriate support. The story of the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre therefore exists at the intersection of many important conversations: public safety, emergency response, mental health, community resilience, and the responsibility of historical memory. Each topic provides a different perspective, but all return to the same central truth. The tragedy was ultimately about people. It was about the lives interrupted, the families changed forever, and the community that had to rebuild after experiencing unimaginable loss. As decades pass, memories can fade. Witnesses grow older. New generations may know the event only through books, documentaries, or memorials. That makes intentional remembrance even more important. History does not preserve itself automatically. People must choose what lessons to carry forward. The most meaningful lesson from San Ysidro is not simply that a terrible crime occurred. It is that behind every tragedy are human beings whose lives deserve recognition and dignity. The responsibility of remembering is therefore not to remain trapped in the horror of the past, but to use that memory to create a more thoughtful future. The San Ysidro McDonald's massacre remains one of the darkest moments in American criminal history, but its final message should not be one of despair. It should be a reminder of the value of every ordinary life, the importance of protecting communities, and the need to respond to suffering with both awareness and compassion. On July 18, 1984, a neighborhood restaurant became the scene of unimaginable violence. But after the violence ended, another story began, the story of survivors rebuilding, families remembering, communities healing, and society learning. That story continues because the lives lost that day continue to matter. The story of the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre does not end with the final moments inside the restaurant, the police investigation, or the creation of a memorial. Like many historical tragedies, its meaning continues to evolve as each generation examines what happened and considers what lessons should be carried forward. The event remains a reminder that history is not only about dates, locations, and statistics. It is about people, decisions, consequences, and the ways communities respond when confronted with unimaginable loss. More than 40 years after July 18, 1984, the massacre continues to represent one of the most significant turning points in discussions about mass violence in the United States. Not because it offered simple answers, but because it forced difficult questions that remain relevant today. At the center of those questions is the issue of prevention. After any tragedy of this magnitude, society naturally looks backward and searches for the warning signs that might have been recognized earlier. In the case of James Oliver Huberty, investigators identified several concerning behaviors that appeared during the months before the attack. His prolonged unemployment had placed severe pressure on his family. His frustration with his circumstances had grown into anger toward society. People who knew him described his increasing paranoia and his belief that others were watching him. He spoke frequently about violence and catastrophic events. Shortly before the massacre, he told his wife that he believed he had a mental health problem and contacted a clinic seeking help. These facts became important parts of the investigation because they provided insight into the period leading up to the tragedy. However, they also reveal how difficult prevention can be. Warning signs are often recognized most clearly after a disaster occurs. Beforehand, they may appear as separate problems rather than a clear path toward violence. This does not diminish the importance of identifying concerns early. Instead, it highlights the challenge faced by families, communities, and institutions attempting to respond before a crisis reaches a dangerous point. The tragedy also changed the way people thought about the relationship between ordinary environments and unexpected violence. Before San Isidro, many Americans associated serious violence with places where conflict was expected. A neighborhood restaurant was different. It was a place where families gathered, employees worked, and customers completed simple daily routines. The attack challenged the assumption that familiar public spaces were naturally protected from extreme acts of violence. This realization had a lasting impact on public awareness. It encouraged communities, businesses, and law enforcement agencies to think more carefully about emergency preparedness in places that had previously seemed beyond the possibility of such danger. The massacre became part of a larger historical shift in how the United States understood public attacks involving strangers. The victims of San Isidro also represent an important reminder about the human cost behind historical events. In discussions of mass violence, there is sometimes a tendency to focus heavily on the attacker, the weapons, the timeline, and the investigation. Those details are necessary for understanding what occurred, but they should never replace the stories of those who were harmed. James Huberty's actions lasted 77 minutes. The victims' lives existed long before those minutes, and, through the memories of their families, continue beyond them. Their identities should not be limited to the circumstances of their deaths. They were people with relationships, responsibilities, personalities, and futures that extended far beyond that afternoon. Remembering victims requires restoring those dimensions to the story. It means recognizing that every person inside the restaurant represented a lifetime of experiences, rather than a single moment recorded in a police report. This perspective also changes the way society understands the aftermath of violence. The conclusion of an attack does not represent the conclusion of suffering. For families who lost loved ones, grief continues in ways that cannot be measured by official timelines. Important moments in life, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, family gatherings, often become reminders of absence. For survivors, the experience of escaping does not mean the experience is forgotten. Physical injuries may heal, but emotional consequences can remain for many years. The impact of the massacre, therefore, extended far beyond the walls of the restaurant. It affected an entire community and continued influencing people who were not physically present, but who shared a connection to those who were. The decision to transform the former restaurant location into a memorial reflected the community's desire to preserve memory in a meaningful way. The site could have become only a reminder of fear, but instead it became a place dedicated to honoring those who died. This transformation represents an important aspect of how societies recover from tragedy. Communities cannot erase painful history, nor should they pretend it never happened. Instead, they find ways to acknowledge the suffering while creating spaces that represent dignity, reflection, and remembrance. The memorial allows future generations to understand what occurred while ensuring that the focus remains on the victims rather than the violence itself. Law enforcement's response to the massacre also remains an important part of its historical significance. Officers responding that afternoon faced circumstances filled with uncertainty. They did not know the exact number of attackers, the condition of people inside, or whether immediate action would save lives or create additional danger. Their response reflected the training and strategies available at the time. However, the tragedy demonstrated that situations involving active shooters required new approaches. Over time, police agencies developed different response models designed to address attacks that were actively occurring rather than situations where a suspect had stopped and negotiations were possible. These changes did not come from one event alone, but San Ysidro was one of the incidents that contributed to a broader transformation in emergency response philosophy. The lesson was painful, but it became part of efforts to protect future communities. Another lasting aspect of the case is the importance of accuracy when telling stories about real tragedies. True crime narratives often attract attention because they involve mystery, investigation, and human behavior under extreme circumstances. However, the people involved are not fictional characters. They are real individuals whose families continue living with the consequences. For that reason, responsible storytelling requires restraint. It requires separating confirmed facts from speculation and avoiding unnecessary focus on sensational elements. The San Ysidro massacre has enough documented significance without exaggeration. The facts alone reveal the tragedy's scale and impact. The responsible approach is not to make the event more dramatic, but to understand it more deeply. This principle is especially important when discussing James Huberty. Examining his background is necessary because understanding the circumstances leading to violence can help society learn. But understanding is not the same as justification. The factors identified by investigators may explain parts of his condition, but they do not excuse his actions. The responsibility for the attack remained with the person who entered the restaurant and chose to harm innocent people. Keeping that distinction clear allows historical analysis to remain both accurate and respectful. The San Ysidro massacre also demonstrates how societies balance remembrance with the need to continue living. Communities affected by tragedy cannot remain permanently frozen in the moment of loss. People continue working, raising families, building relationships, and creating new memories. Moving forward does not mean forgetting. It means carrying memory while allowing life to continue. The people of San Ysidro showed this balance by preserving the memory of the victims while rebuilding the community around the site. Their response reflects resilience, not the absence of pain, but the ability to continue despite it. Ultimately, the legacy of the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre is found not only in what happened, but in what followed. The tragedy influenced law enforcement practices, shaped conversations about public safety, and became part of the history of mass violence in America. Yet its deepest meaning remains personal. It exists in the families who remember loved ones, the survivors who endured unimaginable circumstances, and the community that chose to honor lives rather than allow tragedy to define them. History will continue recording the facts of July 18th, 1984, the location, the timeline, the investigation, and the consequences. But facts alone cannot capture the full meaning of the event. The true legacy lies in remembering that behind every number was a person. Behind every name was a life. Behind every loss was a family. The most important lesson of San Ysidro is therefore not simply that a terrible crime occurred. It is that the value of human life must remain at the center of how society responds to tragedy. Decades after the gunfire ended, the memory of that afternoon continues because people choose to remember. They remember not only what was lost, but why those lives mattered. And that act of remembrance remains the strongest answer history can provide.